All right, we are live for real this time with the Gestalt IT Rundown. My name is Rich Stroffolino, and each week we run down some of the IT news that is germane to hopefully your interest. I am joined by my good friend and coworker, colleague, and scholar among men. I'm talking, of course, of Tom Hollingsworth. Tom, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Rich. I'm glad that you're hanging out with Jermaine. I have Michael, Latoya, and Janet here with me.
I have like three words that make me feel real fancy when I say them. So thank you for taking away one of them for me, Tom. I really appreciate that.
Glad to
So,
help you ruin things.
so it's kind of a slow news week. We're winding down the year. We're getting close to the Christmas holiday and the New Year. Boxing Day is coming up as well. For those of you that are relevant, I found out that KFC is very popular on Christmas Day in Japan. A tradition I'm all in favor of. But regardless, there's not a ton of companies lining up to put out big IT news this particular week. So I thought it would be interesting to look back at 2017 and kind of pick out what we think are some of the big stories that happened this year and that are going to have some impact going into 2018 and beyond. Tom, does that sound fun to you?
That sounds like a winner to me.
All right, Tom, do you want to lead us off? What to you was one of the big stories? I think we're just going to do two each. What do you think was one of the big stories of 2017?
Honestly, one of the biggest stories for me was WannaCry, the massive malware attack that basically swept over the globe and through complete serendipity did not manage to destroy our lives. But it managed to destroy some companies' lives. Shipping companies had to completely reformat things. We're still, this late in the year, finding out about companies that were cleverly hiding the fact that they had their systems wiped out by invasive malware. And then my favorite part is that the payment scheme for this was all in Bitcoin. And so it was very difficult to trace who was getting the payments, but you could verify that they were happening through the blockchain and things like that. And so we're just waiting for the next WannaCry to creep up. I mean, we just found out, I believe it was Monday or even late last week, that this whole thing was put on by the North Koreans. So we've gone from just some clever hackers putting together something that could cause massive problems to a nation state wanting to cause even more massive problems.
Well, yeah, and that was kind of the thing when WannaCry was happening was people were watching where the Bitcoins were going and noticing that, like, I mean, at the time, it probably is a lot more money now, but they really didn't gather all that much money from like literally wreaking havoc on tons of organizations, industries, that kind of stuff. And now knowing that it's a state-sponsored attack, you realize like that was kind of beside the point.
Mm-hmm.
I think this story is really interesting from an enterprise perspective because I mean ransomware has been out there for forever. This is not a new phenomenon. You know, we saw stories from a couple of years ago of like hospitals getting completely locked down, or just mom and pop shops that are paying $200 to $1,000 in Bitcoin just to be able to get their data back. And when it happens on an individual level, it's no big deal. I think on an enterprise and IT level, it's really interesting to see who's responding to this, who's kind of claiming ownership for ransomware. We've seen storage companies do it. We've seen, dedicated disaster. Is this a disaster recovery scenario? Is this a storage problem? Is this a networking problem? Is this just a matter of, not or a visibility problem? We've seen companies like Ixia and Gigamon, making the argument that we just don't have enough visibility into our traffic to be able to prevent attacks like this. On a storage front, that's more on a mitigation factor, being able to spin up secondary storage or whatnot. That's another vertical. So I think that's what makes this really interesting is that we didn't get an answer, even though WannaCry was pretty devastating to a lot of organizations, or at least led to some downtime more than they would ever imagine. I don't think we've still come up with a definitive answer of kind of who's handling ransomware.
Yeah, I think you're right. And honestly, it comes down to that thing I mentioned. It was dumb luck that WannaCry did not wipe out US assets because some researcher managed to accidentally register the kill switch domain before we all woke up and started doing stupid things to our computers. And because of that lack of impact on us, I think there's some soul searching going on with the companies that did get hit. But yeah, we're kind of sitting over here looking over the fence at somebody else's yard on fire going, wow, that's a pretty fire. Never going to go over here. And we know that the next time it's going to happen, disaster recovery and business continuity is built around the idea, oh, look, somebody unplugged a power cord in the data center. Or worse, hey, somebody unplugged US 1 East. But they're not prepared for the idea that the systems are still online. They're just locked down with encryption. I mean, if I told you right now that I was encrypting your laptop with my own special encryption system, how far back would you have to go to verify that the data that was on your laptop was not only accessible, but didn't include the RAT, the remote access tool that I used to encrypt it in the first place?
Tom, to answer your question, I would just cry and crawl into a corner, into a ball, and that would be my reaction to that. But yeah, no, I completely get where you're coming from. Yeah, we're only just starting to see like because it's not a, you're absolutely right. It's not a business continuity problem. It's really not a security problem in the traditional sense. And I think viewing it from a purely prevention standpoint, I think we've seen as a networking guy, prevention is a great idea, but you also have to have to be able to fail gracefully, and that's really hard to do with ransomware. One particular company I talked to this year, Quorum, was kind of they're in disaster recovery, and they have come out with a special SKU that's specifically catered around ransomware. And I think that's how we're, for a lot of larger organizations, are going to have to go, because there are such unique challenges around it.
Agreed.
All right, so Tom, one of my big stories of 2017, and this may not be a traditional pick, this may not be in a lot of other year-end roundups that you're going to see, but it's really important to me personally, and I think it will have some really big impacts on IT and in the industry going forward. And that was I'm a hardware guy at heart. I love me some hardware. It's how I first got into technology. I'm still always interested in getting to know the latest and greatest hardware. I thought about maybe it's NVIDIA. They're making huge strides in the data center. Everyone's doing machine learning. No, it's AMD returning as a viable and beyond just being simply competitive on a price point perspective, a potentially dominant force in enterprise server hardware with their new Naples platform that's based on their new Ryzen architecture. They released it, I want to say, in March. It features a crazy amount of PCIe lanes in a two CPU configuration. This is something where you can get, I think it's 128 lanes per 2 CPU. You're getting like 64 cores and 128 threads. It's just a beast of a CPU. And regardless of whether, does it, they can play with the price point and make it hit wherever they need it to hit for it to be competitive. But the fact that it's been a decade plus since the Opteron days of old, when AMD was truly competitive with Intel, I think down the line, because hardware moves slowly, because capital expenditures don't happen overnight, I think this could have big impacts, especially when you're looking at a hyperconverged stack. I see a lot of hyperconverged companies being really interested in all that I/O that the Naples platform can put out, being really interested in someone like a Nutanix or something like that. I think AMD being viable in the data center, I think is a little bit been overlooked this year.
I agree, and I've been doing a little bit of research on the Ryzen platform, just because the networking nerd desktop that still exists is getting a little long in the tooth, and you start looking at buying guide for this, and basically, unless you're specifically looking for Intel performance at the super high end, Ryzen is the choice for most people. And they'll even caveat it by saying, hey, you know what, single core performance lags 5 to 10% behind Intel. But what runs single core anymore? Dual, quad, Quinn, octa-core. Ryzen kills it in those applications. And when you think about what you're doing in a data center, when you're doing massive parallel processing, when you're doing machine learning, when you're doing Hadoop data set reduction, those are all multi-threaded, multi-core capable applications. And if Ryzen's going 50% or higher on multi-core performance, the market's going to win out there. Absolutely.
Well, and that's always been the dig against AMD, is their single core performance. And in a consumer space, that is, I think, still a very relevant concern in a lot of ways, because consumer software maybe is optimized for 2 cores, maybe because everyone's laptop has 2 cores, no one has a quad. I mean, we're just starting to see really consumer-friendly quad-core mobile CPUs. So on a software level, it's hard to justify. AMD's had native quad core and 8 core with their what was it, with their FX line and stuff like that. They've had tons of cores for a long time and been competitive on a core count level, but you just didn't really see that translate unless you were doing like super specific transcoding applications, which again, tend to have more of an industrial focus, tend to have more commercial applications. And so, those are specifically designed for that. Enterprise, not so much. I mean, I think we're going to be, like you were saying, big data applications. Yeah, that also then encroaches into, where NVIDIA is super strong. That's one of the reasons they've been so successful, is because they're able to do this massive parallelization on a scale that, CPUs is never going to be able to do. But there's a lot of ways that that the Ryzen architecture, both on the enterprise and the consumer level, really makes them excitingly relevant again. And I mean, at least for me, like I said, first PC I ever built was AMD. I always have a soft spot for them. I put together a slideshow right before the Ryzen launch for Gestalt IT, going through how pathetic AMD's releases have been over the last 10 years. They're always like the most disappointing things. They always be like, have like just real, like when Intel first went quad core with like the Q6600 and the Core 2 quads and stuff like that, they were putting out dual socket, dual core FX machines that took up like 300 watts of power, and they were the worst things ever. That was pretty much their entire history. And like seeing them being able to execute and do it reasonably well is, I mean, honestly, like in the last 10 years, is uncharted territory for AMD on a CPU front. So super excited for that. All right, Tom, what do you got for your second story of the important ones of 2017?
Are you ready? This is groundbreaking. This is important. Bitcoin.
What? Now, this is a Bytecoin, you said?
No, Bitcoin. It's an eighth of a Bytecoin.
Oh, okay. Oh my God, it's so valuable.
Well, it is now that we've made this a thing. Yeah, a lot of people, I remember hearing about Bitcoin for the first time and thinking, oh, great, this is folding at home again.
Yeah, really.
But you hear stories about it all the time, because the price of Bitcoin spiked to nearly $20,000 US dollars per coin. Now you've got people who are running password crackers on forgotten wallets or digging through dumps with the permission of the municipality to find a hard drive that might contain a wallet with 3 coins in it. And people are literally going crazy. This is the Tulip Beanie Baby Superman comic thing, except those were all things you could touch. This is data out there somewhere. And I've heard a lot of people that are, they're translating this whole Bitcoin thing. It's not about Bitcoin, it's a blockchain. And I believe that blockchain is one of those magical things that just makes people's ears perk up. As a matter of fact, I just named my cat AISDN blockchain, and it's already getting letters with 10 million in VC funding each.
Okay, but Tom, you can't dispute this. $9.11 of sweet, sweet Bitcoin. I'm basically going to be a millionaire when it hits $1 trillion per coin. So I might take this a little more seriously, Tom.
Well, see, but this is one of the problems, that it's actually kind of been exposed a little bit by the whole massive Bitcoin trading thing. Now that you're able to trade futures, and now that the people who have held on to it are wanting to get rid of it because, hey, it's time to cash out and buy a $400 million pizza. The blockchain that Bitcoin runs on is actually horrendously slow. That's one of the reasons why they forked it to Bitcoin Cash, is because they needed a faster blockchain for these transactions. Because, if you think that inserting a chip card into the reader at the store and waiting 15 seconds for it to authenticate is painful, wait until it takes 4 days for them to authenticate your transaction. I'm pretty sure that any store that tries to take Bitcoin for that purpose will go out of business before the transaction's clear.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that now that it's become like the practical realities of the blockchain are now like super relevant now that it's hit 20,000. I mean, I remember like in 2014, maybe 2013, there was in Cleveland, there was like this whole effort to do like a Bitcoin alley or something like that, where all the businesses were going to like team up and we're all going to take Bitcoin. And even back then, when there weren't quite as many, there were definitely not as many transactions on the blockchain. It was just found to be the pricing was too variable, spiked up and down, and the transactions were taking too long. The same problem that people have had whenever they've tried to set up, Bitcoin ATMs. There's like practical realities of the blockchain. But now, Tom, I want you to go back to 2007 for me. Travel back in time in your mind. There's a time traveler that comes through. He looks remarkably like you, perhaps a little older, perhaps with a more established goatee. And he tells you that in 10 years, the most disruptive technology is going to be a distributed ledger. That to me blows my mind. That like fundamentally, that's all this is like a weird record keeping accounting tool. Yeah, that's powered by math, and like, there's all sorts of guarantees built in. It's not just, you know, it's not like a Google Doc where you're typing it in, someone sees it on the other end. I mean, in a weird way, maybe kind of, but I do think it has. Bitcoin is interesting because it's super valuable, and people imagine, oh my God, what would have happened if I had bought it when it was a tenth of a cent, and now I'm a millionaire because I spent $2 in 2009 sometime. That's why there's like a lot of press coverage, I think, about it. Blockchain, though, you know, we're seeing companies from Microsoft to IBM, all the big players out there are putting in. Those are the only two I can think of off the top of my head. Are investing heavily in blockchain because there is something to be said, like a completely distributed way to either track effort or track a stake in something is extremely valuable. I saw, I think it was Ray Lucchesi shared a blog post about the UN using it to track their like not the Millennium Goals, but what came after the Millennium Goals. You know, tracking progress on projects on the ground, tracking supply chain, tracking literally human effort, and being able to do so in a way that they don't need to sync up to a huge server, which is really relevant when you're, you know, working out of perhaps a underdeveloped country. So I think blockchain is super interesting, but yeah, the Bitcoin explosion has moved the hype so far ahead of where I think it's actually at that it's gonna, you know, it's exactly what you said. It's a buzzword now that everyone has to have. Well, we're distributed, you know, crypto blockchain, and it's gonna be awesome. It's gonna be super cool.
Yeah.
So Tom, to kind of round out our episode, my big one is not really that surprising. I decided I was going to go a little more left field with the AMD thing. For this one, I think a lot of people would agree with it, and we saw it a couple weeks ago at DockerCon, and that was Docker announcing that they would roll in the Kubernetes orchestrator into their Enterprise Edition. Previously, this had been tied to their Swarm orchestrator, obviously a lot less popular in the industry, but in a way, I think this is an expected move for Docker, but really signifies that maybe the bloom has fallen off the rose a little bit. Not to say that Docker's in any trouble, but it used to be Docker was going to eat everything. And I was on a briefing call where they said, I will save names, but that basically that Docker is a open source project that offers a support plan. Like that's their business problem. You can say the same thing about Red Hat. They've been around forever. So I don't think Docker is, like I said, in any trouble. But I think people are realizing that it might not be the world eater that it appeared to be maybe 1 or 2 years ago.
Man, I remember those halcyon days of 2015 when containers were going to change my life, and this crazy company with a whale is leading the charge. The embracing of Kubernetes by Docker is basically looking around and realizing that everyone else is using an iPhone when you are championing the fact that you are the best Windows phone manufacturer out there. You really only have two options. You can force your way into that market, or you can accept reality and start developing for iPhone. In this case, listen, Docker needed to do Swarm because they needed to learn those lessons. They needed to know how to build this thing, and they needed to know how to build a framework. And to me, embracing Kubernetes and making it look like everything is seamless says more for the fact that this really is truly a platform than just some kind of lock-in mechanism. If I can change from Swarm to Kubernetes on the fly, now obviously you're probably gonna have to go out and do Kelsey Hightower's crash course in Kubernetes the hard way to learn it if you're a Swarm guy. But this is not a reformat, reinstall of my entire container orchestration system. And that's a huge deal, both for Kubernetes, because it's the de facto system, but also for Docker, because now they prove they play nice with everybody else.
Well, I think it's important. You've seen a number of managed Kubernetes solutions kind of crop up, achieve feasibility, and a lot of organizations are really interested in. This kind of ties into the whole idea of in private cloud strategies for a lot of companies, where before there was a lot of emphasis on use your IT team, and you can use your OpenStack or Kubernetes or whatever to roll your own. It'll be really great, except it's super hard and you have no idea what you're doing, and it's realistically a waste of resources in a lot of respects compared to public cloud. but you still want to get that value of, having control of your own data, having control of your own hardware, what have you. And I think the fact that those offerings have become more mature made this like a super easy call for Docker to make, because it's only going to that's only going to increase adoption of it across the board. No one's talking about a managed swarm off, like no one is doing that.
No.
And Docker still has a lot of problems or maturity to achieve. Let's say that. With the container ecosystem in general, they've made some key acquisitions, I think, to maybe shore up a little bit of their, to mature their networking offerings, to mature how they interact with permanent storage down the line. That's still very nascent, but I think they see what they need to do. They couldn't. There's no Kubernetes to buy, right? So this was their only option. Was to really roll this in, and to some I don't think it's too late. If they had done this at the end of 2018, I say then you're getting into too late territory.
Oh, yeah.
This feels just on time, but not the most forward thinking. Maybe this is an adequate response to where the industry is going.
Now, here's the big question for 2018 for people watching. Does this mean that Docker and Kubernetes and containers make that jump to the next level to be a thing like cloud? Or are they going to be hanging out with the OpenStacks of the world in the IT future yet to come technology support meetings?
If I had to bet, I would probably say the latter, only because, inertia is a hell of a thing in the enterprise. And, I was talking to Howard Marks for our IT Origins, and, he said, it's great. Like the principles behind containers are great if you're starting from nothing. But when you're doing an airline scheduling application that's been around for 35 years and has been operating, you're not going to move that to the cloud. There are or you're not going to containerize that, and there are so many container resistant applications. Anything that basically runs on a database, I would be very hesitant. I'm not saying that it can never happen. With enough maturity, I think, and enough foresight and enough time. Right. Sure. Anything's possible. That being said,
honestly, I think I've got the solution to all their problems.
Blockchain.
It's Docker, but Uber for blockchain with AI.
And machine learning. Hey.
Slam dunk right there.
And software defined. Yeah, of course. Yes. A software defined Uber for blockchain, machine learning, AI. There we go. It's easy. So that just about does it. If you have a big story that you think we missed, let me know about it. Shoot it to me on Twitter at Mr. Anthropology, MR Anthropology on Twitter. Tom, where can people harass you about what we got wrong here?
Well, you can hit me up on Twitter. That's the easiest way to make fun of me. My Twitter handle is Networking Nerd. If you would like to come leave long-form comments telling me that I absolutely don't know what I'm talking about and I'm just some talking head, you can check me out on my blog at networkingnerd.net or some of the writing that I do on gestaltit.com.
Woohoo! Yeah, you can find tons of stuff from me there. We're going to have a year-end wrap-up post. We got all sorts of cool podcasts and interviews and video things that live there. So check us out there, and check out, if you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hey, I'm a YouTube guy. I'm telling you to subscribe. Let's do this. Yeah, we'll be back. I think we're going to take a week off next week for the Gestalt IT rundown for the holidays and everything like that. But we'll be back next week on the 3rd, right? That's the Wednesday, January 3rd, 12:30 p.m. Eastern time, live. We'll tweet out the link. Follow us, view us, watch us, enjoy us. Until then, Tom, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And everyone out there, have a super sparkly day. I can't press the button.